what self-compassion, self-love, really having a deep sense of self-acceptance, how that transforms your self-worth and impacts everything that you create, including the money and the abundance and the impact and all of it. So what does self-love, self-compassion, self-acceptance have to do with your self-worth? And what does it have to do with money? What does it have to do with creating abundance, with actualizing your vision, with showing up more powerfully as a leader in your business? These are all the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about today, right? Stepping into that full impact, playing full out. One of the biggest gifts that I would say that you can really actually give yourself is practicing deep self-love and self-compassion. Really profound self-acceptance and a belief in your own self-worth, right? So I'm a huge believer in the self-love movement. I think it's actually some of the greatest work that we are here to do as humans on this earth, and especially as women, and really allowing ourselves to be powerful receivers. That receiving has to start from within. It has to begin with ourselves, and how that we allow ourselves to receive even our own love, right? Because when it gets down to it, truly the relationship that you have with yourself is one of the most important relationships that you have. I have a beautiful husband. I have incredible children. I have, wonderful parents and, incredible family and friendships around me. And yet everything begins with how I am with myself, right? And if I can't be kind and generous and compassionate and loving and accepting of myself, none of that can translate out, right? And certainly won't allow me to, to do the work that I'm here to do either. So I really have come to realize that this work is around creating your true abundance. So much of it is tied to that. A lot of the work that I do with clients, when I see whether they're really showing up for their leadership, showing up for their impact, showing up for their vision, really stepping into embodying their highest self, the things that are getting in the way is this self-criticism, this judgment, this self-hatred sometimes, or lack of self-belief. And it breaks my heart because, really, you can't do any of those things, right? And you really can't shine your light unless you're in that place of deep self-love. And I get it because, just a confession to all of you here, there was a part of my life where I did not believe I was enough. I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't think I was pretty enough. I didn't think I was good enough for somebody to love me and stick around, or that I was worthy enough of the abundance or the money or, any of those things in my life. Right. And it wasn't until I really did that deep dive into uncovering those old programs and old stories and disempowering beliefs that I actually was able to transition my life. Right. And so it really, it's no coincidence that my own journey of self-healing and self-love was, directly tied to my, the journey of healing my relationship with money and healing my relationship with allowing myself to actually enjoy a beautifully abundant life, right? Allowing myself to be a powerful receiver, because it was in that transition of coming into self-love, of coming into self-belief, of coming, treating myself with self-compassion, that I developed my sense of enoughness, right? The realizing that I could accept myself fully, not, despite or in spite of whatever, imperfections I might have, but, just as I am, period, because I am enough, right? And the truth is the same for you. You are enough. You are whole. You are complete. You already are incredible being. And that's, really the message that I'm here to give today. So, what I discovered is that it was my own self-blame. It was my own my own shame, or, patterns of things that I had heard people tell me in my life that were creating those stories of the not good enough. And so realizing that, realizing that program, understanding what those hidden beliefs were, was really key to actually opening my eyes up to a different way, and realizing my own true worth. So one of the things that I want to tell you here is that, self-criticism, judgment, all those things, they're never going to be the motivation that gets you where you need to go, right? Like, you just cannot hate yourself beautiful, or you can't criticize yourself into, being good enough. Like, it just doesn't work, right? It does not work. So one of the things that I have realized is that, actually learning to love yourself is really the one thing that can change the direction in your life, in terms of you actually stepping into that higher self, right? You actually actualizing that vision of becoming, becoming the woman who is, coming with total vulnerability, with an open heart, with generosity, here ready to share her gifts, to welcome in opportunities, right? That's the woman who's ready to step into her highest self, right? To actualize the vision. That's what happens when you're in this place of deep self-love. So one of the things that I always like to start with sometimes is just to think about, like, the definition of words, and, what is it really telling us? Because it's a great perspective to have as we go about this work, and we think about these three core elements of self-compassion and self-love and self-acceptance, and how that translates into our self-worth, which is what allows us to actualize our dreams and step into that higher version of ourselves. And, when I was thinking about and writing down, and I was looking in the dictionary at some of the terms that were coming up, and I wrote some of them down here, some of the things that I wrote down were, self-compassion is like actually having compassion for yourself, giving yourself grace when you're in that moment of, failure, when things aren't going exactly the way you want them to. It's really being kind and sweet with yourself, right? Noticing the thoughts that are running through your head and in your mind, and the tone of which you are speaking to yourself, right? What's that narrative look like? And what does it sound like? Self-judgment is sort of the opposite of that, right? Or that self-criticism, right? That's the opposite dynamic of those three essential superpowers and non-negotiables, and creating your abundance and creating your worth, and really, diving into that enoughness of who you are. Because they're self-criticism, self-judgment, all of that, these are all forms of self-sabotage. And when we're in a place of self-judgment, or we're in a place of self-criticism, what we're really doing is we are disconnecting from ourselves. We are disconnecting from our abundance. We are disconnecting from our truth. We are disconnecting from our higher self. We are disconnecting from our intuition. We are disconnecting to everything that's powerful and whole about us. And effectively, we are working against ourselves. And everything is a mirror, you guys. Everything is a mirror. And so when we're in this place of self-criticism or judgment, even if it's, we're judging outwardly, it's really because we're judging ourselves, right? There's something about somebody else is doing or saying, or something that they have, that's making, it's triggering a feeling and emotion in ourselves that we don't enjoy, right? That's creating that resistance, that's creating that discomfort, because it's triggering something in us that we have not resolved yet. And that's really this work, right? Just to share another story with you, I know that for myself, there was a long period of time in my life where I judged other people who had money, right? I judged people who were wealthy and rich, and thought that they were like greedy and corrupt, or doing bad things for the environment, or who knows what, right? And it was actually never about them, right? It was always about my own inner feelings of not being enough, right? My own loop and programming that was playing in my own head around scarcity and lack. And that, not feeling worthy, right? Not feeling good enough, to be a part of that crowd. And so rather than take responsibility for that for a long, long time, before I started down my own self-awareness journey and into a journey of self-acceptance and self-love, and really that healing journey of growth and abundance, I deflected it. I was defensive about it rather than taking the responsibility, So when you are not in self-love, when you're not practicing acceptance or self-compassion, you are actively working against yourself. So I want to say that again. When you are not in self-love, practicing self-acceptance, embodying self-compassion, you are actively working against yourself. Guys, that is so, so powerful. So I want that to sink in for you, because you are literally, it's like you are holding your hands out front, or like holding the door shut to all the abundance, all the richness, all the goodness, all the flow, all the receiving of what's possible and your potential. You are literally holding it back from coming in. It's trying to reach you and you're blocking it. This is so, so powerful, right? You're working against your ability to step up as a leader into your impact. You're working against your ability to lean in and take action. You're disconnecting from yourself and your wisdom and your intuition. You are, impacting your ability to step up and get visible with your message, right? Or letting people hear what's on your heart, sharing your gifts, asking for the things that you want, allowing in the opportunities. You are actively working against that when you're in that place of self-criticism and self-judgment, right? Actively loving yourself, actively practicing softness, actively practicing compassion for yourself allows you to stand in awe of your beauty, of the magic that is you, the miracle that you are in this universe. Because my goodness, you are, a soul inside of a body, right? It is a miracle that you are here, that you are alive, that you have this incredible opportunity. And, when we are in that place of self-criticism or self-doubt or judgment, we are actively denying that grace that is us. And I see a lot of women, who are either, leaders in businesses and corporate settings, or entrepreneurs running their own businesses, who are hiding out. They're not being visible. They're not playing big. They're not showing full out. They're not sharing their gifts. They're not sharing their offers. They're not asking for the raise. They're not saying yes to the opportunities. They're not like actively seeking them. They're denying desires or sabotaging income opportunities because they're always waiting to be perfect, right? When I have that thing, when I lose the 10 pounds, when I look different, when, this thing changes, then I'll be ready to go do that, right? And the deal is, when you are waiting for something on the outside to shift so that you can, feel enough and feel worthy of something, that won't ever work, because even if you get that thing, there will still be this empty hole inside that has not been filled up, because all of that has to actually be sourced from within, right? Everything comes from the inside out. That's just how it works. Things don't get like created and then poured in. We manifest things from the inside out, right? And so we've got to stand in that place of total self-love and self-acceptance and self-compassion for ourselves, so that we can actually create the reality that we're wanting to create, right? Standing in that enoughness. If I'm kind to myself, and this gets into this core disempowering belief here that, if I'm kind to myself, then I won't get anything done. Or, if I'm kind and loving to myself, then I'm just going to like let myself off the hook and I won't be productive, right? There's all these old stories and whispers that, maybe you heard from an old coach or a mother or a father or a religious leader or, somebody other in your life that, was telling you these critical judgmental things that you have taken on as your own story, right? And, the truth of the matter is that, that is not the story, right? That is just a thought that is, passing through your head that you have, you've taken on, right, and decided to embody, right? And so the whole goal of this conversation is really to wake us up to what the truth of your abundance, right? The truth of really what you're here to do, right? And embrace yourself as you are uniquely, right? That you are magic, and you don't have to become some other thing, or or criticize your way there, because that never works, right? And there's still a lot of places where this shows up, you guys, right? We're in a society where we feel like we have to shame people, or like hound them or berate them. I mean, even in some corporate settings, right? It's all that criticism. Like, we think it's somehow going to motivate people, but like, it's very disempowering. There's nothing empowering about that, right? And I really want you to think about, where are the opportunities for you to give yourself some grace, right? Where can you actually start to claim right now, giving yourself some love? If I give myself some self-compassion, if I'm kind to myself about this, does that mean I'm letting myself off the hook? Right? There's a real addiction to being busy, being super productive, right? That comes into a lot of this self-criticism that we speak to ourselves on a daily basis, right? This mind loop of thoughts that's running through. So I wanted to share the work of somebody named Kristen Neff, and she actually is I think she's a psychologist, but she's done a lot of really interesting research around self-compassion. And I'm not going to like reinvent it, because she's actually done a lot of the research. I want to give her some credit, but she has, 3 things that she's really a proponent of as the antidotes for, embracing more self-compassion and really getting into a place of self-love and self-acceptance. And the first one is pretty obvious, but I think it's important, right? It's just this idea, and we've been talking about it throughout this live, is this idea of self-kindness versus self-judgment. Where can we give ourselves more self-kindness, right? And generally it's when things don't work out, or things are getting messy, or we yelled at our kids and we wanted to have responded differently, or we got defensive when our spouse said something and we would have preferred to, have figured out some way to take responsibility and, and de-escalate versus escalate that conversation, right? I know, as like, I was just thinking back when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about like the moments where when you're a new mom and like you've got a toddler and you're, in the middle of the grocery checkout line and the phone is ringing and you're trying to pay and your toddler is spazzing and having a, like a fit, and you're thinking, oh my God, like everybody's around me thinking I'm a terrible mom, and then I don't know how to I can't get my kids to behave, right? Versus standing in a place of like noticing the woman that's behind you in line and going, deep breath, she's been through this before. She's been in this moment. She's had this like crazy toddler too. It's all right. We're all in it together, right? Like that's the difference. That's the difference, right? It's in those actual moments where we get to choose how we respond, right? Do we want to respond with self-kindness and compassion and self-love and acceptance for where we are, or do we want to respond with self-judgment? The second piece is just connecting back to our common humanity, right? Versus feeling like we're isolated. We're the only ones out here who's ever had this experience. Like, I suck. This is terrible. My launch didn't go the way I wanted it to, or I didn't get that contract, or another year and I didn't get the raise. It must be me, right? And this is actually a concept that there's a wonderful book called The Confidence Code that is a phenomenal book around girls and leadership and women, and how our brains are hardwired towards perfection, and how we, it starts really early, that as girls, they've done the research and it shows that if a girl makes a mistake on a test, her response will be, oh, there must be something wrong with me. Versus when a boy, of the same age does that, they'll think, oh, the test was a crappy test. It was a bad environment. I just didn't sleep well, and they still think like, I'm great. The test sucked. Right. And so I find that so fascinating. Right. But it goes back to this concept of common humanity versus isolation, right? And so I'm not suggesting that we like slough off the responsibility, right? If something doesn't go well or we have some sort of epic failure, clearly we want to harvest the lesson, but we don't want to internalize it, and make it only about us. Like, I'm the only one who's ever felt this way, or we want to again go back to that common humanity. So going back to that example that I gave of standing in the line with the crazy toddler, right? Choosing to connect with other people who've had like experiences and opening our heart to be more vulnerable and sharing that with authenticity, right? Accepting that, we're not the only ones who've ever been through this kind of experience. And like, there's probably something to learn from it. The third thing that she talks about in her research for, really coming into a practice of loving yourself, a practice of self-compassion, and a practice of self-love is this idea of just being mindful, right? Versus over identifying with whatever that negative thought pattern is, or that habit is, or that belief set. And so I teach this inside of my money mastery community a lot, is that, we are not our thoughts. We are actually the observer of our thoughts. And so this is a really, really empowering realization that you actually get to direct the story. And so if there's a negative thought there, that's not indicative of who you are. It's just something that you get to be really gentle with about observing. And so I love how she talks about this with this concept of mindfulness, because that's how I teach it too. And that, we really want to stand as the observer of our thoughts and then direct how we actually, which thoughts we want to choose to support us going forward, right? Because we don't have to choose the disempowering ones, right? We don't have to choose the old narrative. We don't have to choose, the self-judgment and the self-criticism, right? We can choose instead to be kind and loving and to really think about, if my best friend were in this situation, how would I approach her? What tone would I use, right? How would I soften into this? How would I relax into this and give some grace